Which is where like those connections and coordination with community-based resources are so important, because we can't do that, but we can make the accommodations based on the recommendation of the expert. We don't have the experts, but we can work with them.
And I think we're going to grow in this area a ton. Just like back 20 years ago, we didn't know much about autism, and we've grown a ton. This is our new area to grow in.
I'm Anna.
I'm Darcy.
And I'm Leanne, and we're here to discuss court cases because they teach us how to effectively run special education.
And I'm Stefan. I work in general education, and I'm here to get sped-splained too.
Okay, this case involves a student in gen ed who was facing pretty significant challenges related to mental health. So she was diagnosed with anxiety, PTSD. I don't need to describe PTSD, right?
No, that one, that's not a sped thing.
I'm just saying.
That one I got.
Okay, so she was diagnosed with anxiety, PTSD, depression, ADHD, and has a documented history of child neglect. So from kindergarten to 7th grade, the student was in private school in gen ed, and then she transferred to the district middle school in 8th grade, and the district started documenting difficulties pretty much right away. She was leaving class to hide in the bathroom. She was visiting the nurse with anxiety. They put her in a tier 2 intervention, which sounded to me like a check in, check out, and then she was allowed to use a break pass to leave the classroom. Her grades started dropping. She started failing math and science, and the school documented those regular absences from class were impacting her learning. So about a month after transferring to the district, the parents were then communicating their concerns about her emotional well-being and anxiety and everything else. And they informed the school of her diagnoses. I think at that point, like after it had been a month, they said, hey, she has all these diagnoses. And the school was continuing on with those tier 2 interventions. So they started those interventions before they knew she had diagnosed anxiety and all that stuff. The family at this point hadn't requested a formal special education evaluation or anything, but they did continue to keep coming back to the school concerned about her ongoing academic struggles. And then she transitioned to the high school during the pandemic, which goes so well for everybody, right?
Yeah.
In remote learning, her struggles were intensified. Her grades dropped even more. Mom was emailing the school more frequently, concerned about her failing classes, and she was having emotional disengagement. Then they ended up withdrawing her from school and homeschooled her for 4 months. So she was homeschooled for 4 months, then they re-enrolled her again in school some point during second semester when they went back to in-person learning. They were reporting that in the case, they reported that they believe that the structured school environment would support that anxiety, academic performance, engagement, and all of that. So by spring of that year.
So this would be spring 2021?
Yeah. So she's in 9th grade now. So spring of 9th grade. So she's been in the district for a year and a half at this point. So by the spring, the parents have determined that the school district's interventions, those tier 2 interventions, aren't adequately addressing her needs. The student experienced a suicide attempt, and the parents decided to put her in a private out-of-state residential facility without notifying the district. So this suicide attempt happened, I think, in the home or community setting, not at school. And so they said, okay, we are going to get her the help that she needs and put her in this outside facility. The facility said that they would provide the academic and the round-the-clock supervision that they felt she needed for safety and stability. Later, the family filed for due process, arguing that the district had failed its child find obligation. So, Stefan, what do you know about Child Find that
I mean,
Jake is
I
telling
followed
me
that whole
nothing?
thing. I was like, slam dunk. I've got this. I can, not that I have any experience with this, but I can talk about this, not a problem. And then child find nothing.
So tell
Nothing.
me what you
Well
think
done.
was
The
going
old
on.
rope a dope. Tell you what I think is going on.
What do you think was going on? You said, I've got this. What do you have?
Well, I mean, you work in public education long
Why
enough.
are you laughing,
No,
Gail?
Darcy's over there laughing because Anna's bullying me. That's why.
You're like, what do you have? What is it exactly?
Oh, I wonder who I learned that from.
No, all I mean is, this is an extreme case for sure, but unfortunately, not an uncommon one in public education, right? A student who has, uh, I mean, these would qualify as ACEs, right? Adverse child experiences. Are you impressed with me that I knew that? I watched Paper Tiger, no big deal. And, but anxiety, PTSD, depression, ADHD, the history of neglect is one that, at least I don't. I didn't realize that was something you could. Was that a diagnosis or is that just like a
It just said documented
document?
history of neglect.
So
So
anxiety, PTSD, depression, ADHD. I mean, I had multiple students with one or several of those in my classes, and so then, especially when you're talking middle school, that's a tough time for every kid. This kid is going to have a harder time than others, and then you throw in the pandemic, so there's more time at home, which is we don't know what that environment is like, but it seems not. I mean, that's what we saw. Here's what I'm thinking. I remember when schools in Washington shut down for the pandemic, and we had that Monday. Remember, we had that Monday where in our district where like teachers and students were there. It was the last day, and they sent them all home for the remainder of the school year. We thought it was just gonna be a couple weeks, and I remember like just kind of being like ramped up. I spent all day with teachers, and I'm walking out, and I see one of my former students who's at the high school, and I said, "Are you guys ready for this? You ready? You need anything?" And like her friend was with her, and she goes, "Yeah, just I don't really like being at home. Like I don't. This is a bummer. Like I don't like I come to school to see my friends, and I don't I don't want to be at home." And so like that's always really stuck with me because like you have these kids during the pandemic who are like have to be at home, and not necessarily that the school is a safe place for this person, but it was structured and had resources. And so I don't know, all of those things you were talking about, I was like, yep, yep, yep. I'm familiar with out of state residential placements, kind of. But then when you said child find, no idea what that is. I mean, we play that game every day with our own kids. We play child hide, where we hide from them. I've got no idea. So child find, nothing.
do one of you want to explain, Jeffrey? Do you want me to?
Well, it seems to me that the threshold for child find was met. There was definitely a documented medical diagnosis or 3. And then there was also an educational impact. So it would make sense to me that the district would at least document something about how they ruled out that there wasn't a need for an evaluation.
So Child Find requires schools to identify and locate and evaluate kids that are suspected of having those disabilities, like we talked about with the 3 prongs, that one of them being that suspected disability. So Child Find is saying that we're going to find you and evaluate you to see if you need SDI. It's a law regulation.
Yeah, it's a whack.
It's a law. It's a regulation. Yeah, it's a whack. Not what
It's
she asked.
required.
Come on.
Yes.
Code. Is it a law? Is it a regulation? Is it a code? It's a whack. Okay, so in that sense, is this essentially a whack code law? Same thing. Bad teachers. That says that schools will identify kids who have disabilities. Is that what that is?
It's not just identify them, it's it's intentionally seek them out, right? Like if you have knowledge that you would say, we have this history of this kid struggling, we need to consider whether they need an evaluation or not.
So it's the school's responsibility to find children that need additional support.
They suspect of having a
After
disability.
having a disability.
Yeah, if you had a school district that was never referring any children for special education, they would not be meeting their child find obligation, is what we call it. And so teachers are supposed to look for the signs of a disability and an impact and refer.
Really common when they're young, right? Right? Like we have lots of systems, and then we kind of, I mean, they get referred throughout their school system, but it's not as common the older you get because usually your disability is with you for your life.
And so in this case, the parents were claiming that they alerted the school multiple times about their student struggles, including her mental health diagnoses, right? They disclosed that, and that the district was delaying in identifying her as eligible for special ed, and that was denying her FAPE, is what family is claiming.
I don't remember, did you say if the student was on a 504, or I know that she was receiving interventions?
It did not say if she was on a 504. Just that she was receiving those, tier 2 interventions.
And you said those tier 2 were things like check-in with counselors. You said a break path.
Yeah, they said check-ins. So I don't know. It didn't say who she was checking in with, or if I just got the impression it was like similar to a check-in, check-out intervention where multiple people throughout the day are making contact with the student. How is it going, right? Like, so building rapport and having contact throughout the day. And then
that seems like a tier 1.
She
seems like things that teachers should be doing.
Conversation. And then she had like a break pass, and she could go to the nurse when she requested it. They were letting her go to the bathroom when she requested. So, I mean, from my stance and my behavior background, they were doing a lot to try to kind of give her some leeway with her anxiety in the school setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. It sounds like those are good accommodations.
Is leeway enough? Or would that be the avenue for like an evaluation that, because the school's not providing like specific intentional mental health support, it's providing accommodations, right? Without a diagnosis or an evaluation, that's probably enough, right?
Well, the question is it working? Is this supportive? Is the student benefiting from it? If she's continuing to show a decline in her mental health, then it sounds to me like that probably wasn't beneficial or didn't make it any better necessarily. It doesn't mean it was making it worse, but.
And so from the parents' perspective, they contacted the school, sounds like during her 8th grade year, and said, hey, here's all of her diagnoses, which she must have gotten from the private school that she was at, K7, at some point.
Well, if it's a diagnosis of like anxiety, PTSD, depression, those would come from a doctor.
And so
was she getting outside counseling and mental health counseling? Yeah, I kind of have to like just talk about my struggle with this because I think I feel like I have an answer for the child find, but the bigger question always is, what about the kid? And like, how do school systems support a child who's suicidal, right? Like, there's lots of things we can do to identify that and accommodations we can put in place. But at the end of the day, what does the school system have to SDI that?
So is your guess that the school district met their obligation for child find?
No, my guess is that they failed their obligation to child find. They were doing a lot. They had the diagnosis. They should have sat down and said, do we need to do an evaluation? In my opinion.
Yeah, the threshold for child find is much lower than the threshold for eligibility. So finding a student eligible for an IEP or for special education is a much more comprehensive task than just going that we suspect a disability and we know there's an educational impact. That could be enough to trigger child
So
find.
it could just be a teacher that's saying like, hey, this kid, like, I think they have a disability and they are really struggling in my class. Can we test them? And you need parent support
and there
for
is
that, right? Parent consent for testing.
right. And there is a child find obligation even for 504. So they could have looked at that first. And it doesn't sound like they did that either. So both of those things are procedurally going to be a problem, I would guess.
So family is saying, like, we told you she's struggling and all you did was intervene. And school is saying, we did intervene. You never requested a formal evaluation. So, they were saying we implemented interventions based on the information we had. You never requested a formal eval. So we thought we were giving those adequate supports through our gen ed interventions. Parents requested compensatory services for SDI and related services. They also requested tuition reimbursement from the residential placement.
Saw that
they
coming.
did.
I literally have a
You bet
star
they
next to
did.
it up here. Like, I bet you that one's coming back.
Feels like that happened.
They asked for an IEP and to be a part of the conversation, like determination and what the least restrictive environment is. They also asked for a declaratory relief. Is that how you say that? How do you say that? Declaratory relief? So that's a formal declaration from the court saying that the district denied.
What is the utility in that?
It's kind of an apology.
It's a black
Formal
guy in the district,
apology.
it just feels like, right? Like, okay.
Taking responsibility.
And then reimbursement for private services that she then later had.
So I remember what comp ed is. Is that from when they withdrew her for 4 months? Would that be when that?
The family is saying she should have been on an IEP. She should have been getting these services. So you owe us those
Back pay.
services.
Even before we took her out of the school.
Gotcha.
And without any evaluation being completed still.
Right. They're saying you failed your obligation to find her eligible or to evaluate her. So she's been denied these services and you owe us for that.
Does anybody want to guess what the judge did with that?
I'm the wrong person to guess, so it's going to be Darcy or Leanne.
I'm going to guess that the judge ordered an evaluation for sure. And if they found her eligible, then there would be some compensatory services.
That would be my guess.
What about tuition reimbursement for?
No.
I don't think so, no, because that is not a public educational setting.
And they didn't give the district
That was my guess.
Right. You gotta at least start with public ed, and then if that doesn't work,
you have to say, this isn't working, I'm taking my kid to private school. If you don't evaluate her, then maybe. But they just moved her. It's a unilateral movement. So I don't think they're going to reimburse that.
That would have I don't know about any of that. But when you said out of state residential and did not inform the school, I was like, there's no way they get reimbursed for that.
I'm really thinking though too, like what, because I'm a special ed junkie, like I would guess that she would qualify either under emotionally behavioral, but I doubt that it'd be under OHI, so other health impairment. And like I'm thinking, what areas would they even serve her with specially designed instruction? Because like Darcy said, we don't really have great mental health specially designed instruction. We have reading, writing, math, social, emotional, adaptive behavior. So I can see the social emotional behavior pieces.
Yeah, that's what I would guess too. And I would guess they'd probably look at OHI because she has the diagnoses where the emotional, she doesn't have long-standing poor relationships. She's not, how do you prove that's not maladjustment? So I would guess that's what they would look at. I would also guess they probably don't tell us because
they don't tell us that. So the ALJ, do you remember that?
Yeah. The Adjudicated?
ALJ.
Adjudicated.
Uh-huh.
No, give me the A, 'cause
Administrative.
administrative law judge. Boom. Again, edited that podcast last night, so there was no way.
So the ALJ ruled partially in favor of the family, finding that the district did violate its child fine obligation by not initiating a timely evaluation, despite there was clear evidence that the student was struggling significantly. And the school itself said that that was impacting her education, and they still chose not to evaluate. So that did was determined to be a failure, which amounted to a denial of FAPE. So the district was ordered to provide those compensatory services to the student, although the exact nature of those services wasn't disclosed in the public decision. The ALJ denied the tuition and therapeutic reimbursement, acknowledging that while the district failed to provide FAPE, the out-of-state placement was not necessary or appropriate under IDEA for the educational needs, and the family didn't inform the district of the placement prior to withdrawing her. And then it didn't say anything about the IEP in the decision at all.
They didn't order an evaluation?
But they did say they denied child fine, so I would assume that
Yeah,
did the
that's one of the
evaluation.
remedies.
But family specifically said, and we want an IEP. So to me, it makes sense that this isn't saying the court can't say, yes, you need to give an IEP because no evaluation has been done.
Right. But they could order an evaluation, so that surprises me. It didn't.
Yeah, that it wasn't listed in there.
Even though it's implied by the fact that that's what they were found guilty of.
What'd you learn,
Yeah.
Stephen?
Child fine. It makes sense to me, but I'll say something when we turn the mics off. I just it gives me not a whole new appreciation, but a deepened appreciation for the value that schools provide for communities. Like, it takes a village. Well, we don't live in villages anymore, and schools kind of are a village. And so when you have all of these dedicated professionals and exposure to varied expertise, and your kid is around them all day, I mean, and I spent however many years in the classroom and spent my entire professional career in education and had never heard of child fine. Just kind of figured that was my responsibility as a teacher to be. And again, 7th grade, and so a little different by that age, but
well, this was a 9th grader.
That's true. Yeah. But like, to be constantly looking out for a kid for more than just your content area, I mean, that's what teachers do. Like, you've got this literal legal obligation to be thinking about what this student needs, not just within the academic setting. And so I don't know, I think it's comforting to me that is a legal requirement, not just like a good faith, like we've got your kid's best interest at heart. And that's also that value that schools bring beyond just like individual parent roles, kind of like with the one we were talking about with the little preschooler. They can look a lot different at school than they do at home, and just that varied setting is very, very important. My lingering question is, Darcy, you said that we don't do a great job providing like mental health SDI. What might that look like? And is that like what Eric does?
Oh. So what does that look like? I'm going to need you guys to jump in. It's really messy, right? Because who really can do mental health are counselors outside of schools. Even our school counselors are not trained in mental health. They take a different track.
Some districts have like school social workers or a licensed mental health counselor.
Very few.
And those people are rarely on an IEP as a service provider.
I think it depends on the district, though, because in some districts that is if they have that staff, like I'm thinking not where we live does that exist, but
they tried.
The districts I work with on the west side, a lot of them have that in the IEP.
And they got funding at the local high school here for a mental health counselor. And the problem they ran into is they couldn't find one. but
Yeah,
they
but even then, like what Leanne said, they wouldn't have been written in an IEP.
Gotcha.
Most likely. When you have
I mean,
one for 3,000 kids, that's very different than when you have one for 500 kids.
but she's a 9th grader and she can opt out of mental health
Right. The other
counseling.
thing is you have for any mental health counseling, there's a legal consent age, which is dependent on your state. But at a certain age, it's 13 now in Washington, you can say, no, I don't want that. I refuse.
Guaranteed every school district is grappling with this right now because, yeah, we're really good at some areas of disability, have a lot of techniques, a lot of strategies, a lot of training. Mental health is not one of them. So I do think we struggle with what does specially designed instruction look like when a child is exhibiting all these different behaviors. I mean, anxiety is getting to be like we have tons of strategies. ADHD, we have tons of strategies. But suicide, depression, not a ton of really great evidence-based practices that a special ed teacher could be providing that specially designed instruction on.
Which is where like those connections and coordination with community-based resources are so important, because we can't do that, but we can make the accommodations based on the recommendation of the expert. We don't have the experts, but we can work with them.
And I think we're going to grow in this area a ton, just like back 20 years ago, we didn't know much about autism and we've grown a ton. This is our new area to grow in.
Does it have any crossover with the SEL standards? Is that an avenue in for gen ed teachers?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, that's your tier
Absolutely.
1 right there. And we don't know if this student would have been evaluated, if she would have even qualified. It could have been that they could have evaluated and she would have ended up on a 504 with some of the same exact interventions and accommodations that the school was already providing. So I don't even think the school was at fault for the way they were addressing some of the issues. They just should have put it through a formal evaluation process.
Yep.
The second part of Stefan's question, though, was like about the student safety and well-being side of school. What does that look like?
Yeah, so we have a department, school safety and well-being at North Central ESD, and they have kind of different pathways through that. So one is they do have school where they have people contracted to be in the school and providing a certain tier 2, tier 3 service. And so it depends on like how the school was rated and scores and all of those kind of things that they come together with this formula, whether you get the additional person or not. And believe it or not, some schools say no, thank you. But you have to have a system for it. Like, how do you find the kids? Are you willing to screen everyone to find the kids who have anxiety and feel like they don't fit in? And then are you willing to do that? Are you willing to tell parents that this is what you're doing across the board? Right? Like there's a system that has to be in place for this person to attach and connect with kids, not just standing in the
Yeah.
hallway for 8 hours going, "Oh, yeah, I'm here if you need me, come talk to me," because that's really popular at the high school level that kids just love to go, "I wanna go talk to that mental health person," right? And even when schools contract with mental health services and they bring someone in and they give them to an office, what's the system for that to meet all the confidentiality pieces that they have to have in place in order for those 2 to meet?